Welcome to the 2025 Property Report podcast by PropertyGuru. In this season, we're diving into the key trends transforming Asia's real estate landscape, guided by insights from some of the industry's leading voices. In today's episode, we're exploring a powerful evolution in urban design, one that shifts the focus from just buildings and infrastructure to the actual human experience. Cities across Asia are being reimagined to prioritize community, comfort, and well-being, changing the way we move, connect, and feel at home. We're joined today by a panel of thought leaders from the PropertyGuru Asia Real Estate Summit, each bringing a unique perspective on the future of urban living. First, we have Anton Wormann, the creator of Anton in Japan. He's an entrepreneur and real estate advisor with first-hand experience navigating urban life across Asia's most dynamic cities. Next is David Chong, Chief Operating Officer at the REHDA Institute in Malaysia. David brings deep expertise in urban policy and planning with a focus on sustainable and inclusive development. And finally, Bianca, Vice President and Head of Design, Innovation and Strategy at SMDC. Jessica leads future-focused design initiatives, blending innovation with a human-centric approach to housing and community living. Jessica, let's start with you. From a design and strategy perspective, what defines a truly human-centric city, and how does this approach differ from more traditional urban planning methods?
Well, first, thanks so much for having me, Tina. I'm very glad to be part of this panel. So with that question, what I think human-centric design really is thinking about the needs of a community as a whole. So not just thinking about an individual's needs, but rather thinking of how we can support a larger community and really build upon their needs. So whether that is needs for transportation, work, education, livelihood, we're really there to support them in those opportunities. So I think in the past, we've often been more centered towards growth of a whole society, rather than thinking of small micro communities. So as a trend, I see that we're looking at certain interests as a focus, allowing for more specific opportunities and more specific interests for more micro communities.
David, Anton, would love to hear your take on this as well. How do you see human-centric design influencing your work or the cities you engage with?
Thank you, Tina, for having me. I'm Anton in Japan. Konnichiwa. I totally agree with Jessica. I think community is everything when designing a sustainable society, really. I've been living in Japan for the past 6 years, and without the community, I would have never liked to live here, if that makes sense. And I think in order to be able to plan on a bigger scale, I think you need to start small, and you need to start just with the people around you, and start small, and then you just grow bigger and bigger. But that's just from my point of view, and I'm just a one man company. And if you're planning something bigger, maybe you have to approach it from a different kind of angle. But I love working with my community, and that's my key to success here in Tokyo's real estate market.
David?
Hi, Tina, from Kuala Lumpur side, very interesting insights from Jessica and also Anton. From Kuala Lumpur side, we have a city that's not very old, about 1800 years old in terms of modern city. Our independence was since 1957. So we have about 60 to 70 years of planning. I think right now, for example, in Kuala Lumpur, what we're trying to do is we want to reduce urban sprawl. It means to say rather than build outwards across the city, we want to come back inwards to the city. So what we're saying is that we want to focus on the people, right? Less cars, more people-centric. So we want to bring people in a smaller density area, right? Rather than them living very far out of the city. That's number one. Second thing is the green and healthy environment is quite important. Within this communities, like what Jessica mentioned, right? Perhaps focusing on the people, but building smaller communities that they can live in. For instance, in Singapore, downstairs, a human-centric city, you have most of the time where you live in a high-rise, but every few kilometers or so, you have your complete set of what you need. For example, some retail, small retails, right? Some small food stall, local market, so local community. So building all these access to this ecosystem is quite important. So a truly human-centric city, for example, would also focus on community sustainability and rather than cars and transportation. And then another small component to touch on is about housing. So also, a truly human-centric city would look at access to housing and adequate housing that's equitable and inclusive. So I think that's what a truly human-centric city would be about from my side.
Now, David, the idea of the 15-minute city has been gaining momentum. From a policy and planning standpoint, what are the biggest hurdles cities face in making this concept a reality? And are there any examples you've seen where it's actually working?
Okay, I think the problem itself is what you're used to. So if you want to change something, they have to let go of what they're comfortable with and try something new. So when you mentioned about the 15-minute city, I think sometimes the objection may come from the people themselves. For example, if a small community is used to living very close to the city, but they're unwilling to sacrifice for a bigger group of people, living closer to the city, then it's difficult, right? So I think one point I would highlight it would be about the authority. Sometimes the authority may need to make some planning rules that may be a bit difficult to accept initially, but with the big picture in mind, right, with the big planning in mind, normally long-term you will see results. And one component we'll talk about is Singapore. So I think Singapore is a smaller city, so they have no choice, but they have to be very forward-thinking in how they do their city planning. So in the sense, you have to sacrifice for the greater good. I think for me, that's what will build a 15-minute centric city, you mentioned.
Jessica, Anton, what's your perspective on this? Do you see the 15-minute city as a practical goal? And how might it shape the way we live day to day?
Absolutely. I think it's very practical to have this mindset of designing towards a 15-minute city. For me, the biggest challenge that we would be facing when designing and developing an idealistic 15-minute city is really the infrastructure around it and planning for future-proofing the infrastructure. So there are some wonderful examples of cities that are very hardworking. I just had a conversation with another architect from the UK, and we were talking about how Hong Kong is such a successful city because it's so hardworking. Just similar to Singapore, it has so many layers into it. And so in that way, they've been able to future-proof themselves, not just thinking in terms of transportation, but they've also allowed for different types of housing. I know now there's some land issues and regulations that they're experiencing. But from a planning side, it's actually very well done. So when we're thinking about a 15-minute city, that's what we're really going for, trying to anticipate the needs of the users, both the residents and the visitors, for X number of years.
Anton?
Yes, I totally agree. But I think there's the 15-minute city, it needs to be, obviously there's a lot of planning that needs to be done, but it all comes down to the infrastructure. And that's what city planning is in a way, right? So I'm not very well read up on the subject in itself, so I would leave it to my other co-hosts and David and Jika.
Now, Anton, you've lived in some of the most space-efficient cities in the world. With the rise of micro-housing and compact living, how can we strike a balance between maximizing space and maintaining comfort?
I think people have this view of Tokyo as the compact living metropolis, and I agree, but I also disagree. I've been to many compact living and many tiny apartments, and it's not a very nice way of living, I think. I would rather prefer living in a bigger, older, less modern place with a little bit more space. And Tokyo in its own, it has an excess of housing, an excess of apartments. The stock of housing is just too many houses, too many apartments. So I think rather than building new and rather than building many small apartments in a city like Tokyo, I would see that the utilization of the current houses and housing will be that would be a bigger priority in Tokyo, so to say, from my point of view.
Thank you, Anton. Your thoughts on these, Jessica, David?
Yeah. Maybe I go. I like Jessica's thought. She mentioned Hong Kong as well. Jessica, on Hong Kong, I think very interesting city because it's an old city, a couple hundred years old, but it has to accommodate in different phases as the city grows. So I think what I mentioned earlier about sacrificing is, for example, let's say right now in Malaysia, there in certain jurisdictions like Singapore and Hong Kong and Australia, there's this issue about en bloc sale. So for example, if you have a low density apartment that's been there for, let's say, 40, 50 years, but if the owners need to make way for a higher density apartment to allow more people to access affordable housing, right, more equitable housing, and within the proximity to the city, so sometimes there needs to be some sacrifices made, and policymakers, they would need to look at the bigger picture. So I think that would be a core centric of how the 15 million city can work, because someone has to sacrifice something for the greater good. But at the end, that's where you will be able to plan better, because as the city evolves over time. That's my take on what Jessica mentioned as well. Yeah.
Jessica, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I think that's really wonderful that there's a number of different housing options. In places like the Philippines, like where I am currently, we see a large number of our population growth, especially in the metro area. So it's estimated that by, I think it's 2030, 80% of the population of the Philippines will be living in metros or cosmopolitan areas. So with that, we really need to be thinking about more dense and more affordable spaces. So right now we are creating some smaller and more dense developments just to cater to that quickly growing population. We're trying to balance that off, and we're seeing a great balance in creating very specific and identifiable common areas. So that's really creating a third space for people where they can feel a sense of community. They might and have that opportunity to create community. So it's not necessarily a place where there is a set purpose. It could be like a cafe, a reading nook, or we have a lot of these like co-work, co-live spaces now, where people get to lounge, see people around them. So they might be alone, but they don't feel lonely. They might be able to have opportunities for spontaneous interaction.
For our final question, this one's open to all of you. Looking to the future, what bold ideas or innovations do you think will most transform how cities feel more like home for their residents?
I believe that community spaces and green spaces, that will be like, without green, without parks, without like green patches, I wouldn't feel happy, and I wouldn't feel like a sense of community, especially in a dense city like Tokyo. Like the temples, the different jinjas and oteras and all the parks that's adjacent to it, that's really my sacred spots, and that's where all the festivals and all the Japanese omatsuris, and that's where these places with tradition, that's where people hang out, that's where people meet, and that's where people feel kind of a belonging in this fast-paced, dynamic city where people tear down and build brand new over and over again. So that's where culture means community meets tradition. And without these spaces, I think it would be hard to build a sustainable and build a healthy and build a happy community. I'm talking from a resident of Tokyo's perspective. And this piece of belonging, I think it's deeply rooted in tradition, culture, and also belonging. And without an old, like it's hard to build culture with only brand new things. That's what I'm trying to say. And if you can take what's old and bring that up to a modern standard in a sustainable way, together with greens, together with happiness, together with sustainability, I think it's all going to be like that. That's a good way to build a healthy community, I think.
Yeah, that sense of belonging is so important. I think that's such a good point, Anton. I really see that thriving communities really have spaces where they can take ownership Yes, it might be managed and open to other people, but there is a sense of ownership because, every Thursday I'm going to be sitting on a certain park bench and I'm going to be, feeding the birds. But it's something special that's created and really creates life within a development and a larger community. So, for example, in some of our developments, we have open spaces that were just planned as open spaces. But we can tell now that every Tuesday, people have yoga in that one spot. Every Wednesday, I've heard people call it Wellness Wednesdays. And these are community-based initiatives. But by creating these opportunities for different activities, it's really allowing people to take ownership and find a certain belonging that is often lacking in a large urbanized city.
Just to add a little bit to what Anton and Jessica mentioned as well, I think for me, balancing new, right, as the city evolves, as development, balancing the new, yet conserving the old is a tough and delicate balance. So I think here's where urban conservation is also quite important in the city. If there are areas that are, there's heritage or, that there's certain identity and character that needs to be identified and protected. At the same time, right, if there isn't, that, you need to cater for a growing city as well. So I think balancing is a delicate act, right? Secondly, about greens. Greens is very important for to have a good, healthy living and also a positive mental state. Another thing is also how do you sort of combine and integrate greens, not just in public spaces, but within buildings itself. So how do you integrate modern planning, modern architecture, to integrate green spaces into buildings, right? Despite it being higher density, but there could be certain zones created as well. So I think that should be the whole idea and innovation that cities need to take note of, right? Balancing the old and new, and also integrating green spaces into development as the city becomes denser. Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of today's conversation on the rise of human-centric cities. A big thank you to our guests for their valuable insights, and to you, our listeners, for joining us. I'm Tina Ryan, your host. If you enjoyed this episode, stay tuned for more thought-provoking discussions on the trends shaping real estate and urban life. For more insights from the PropertyGuru Asia Real Estate Summit, visit asiarealestatesummit.com. Until next time.